last month, we discussed the modern workplace and collaboration. And this month, to end the 2021 year, we wanted to reflect on some of our favorite technologies and trends. And 2021 was another unique year because so many businesses were forced to continue their transition to a remote or hybrid workspace. And because of this, so many organizations explored innovative technologies to connect and collaborate and keep up with their teams during this shift. And others have taken this opportunity to completely reinvent their business models. And during this webinar, we want to take some time to reflect on some of our new and favorite innovative technology trends that took place in the areas of transformative innovation. We'll talk about specific technologies. We will talk about industry trends and 2022 predictions. So now to the fun part. I have a few of my lovely co-presenters who will be sharing with you today. So we have Jeffrey Wilhelm, who is the CEO and Chief Executive Officer of Infused Innovations, Phil Magnicheski, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at Infused Innovations, and Bob Borges, who's our Chief Technology Officer, as well as Joel Evans, our voice and emerging technologies expert, as well as senior advisor here at Infused Innovations. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off with you, Phil. So tell me, with so many businesses that have engaged in digital transformation, we saw a lot of innovation happening. So talk to us about the biggest and most transformative innovation that we saw in 2021.
Yeah, so there's a lot of innovation that's happened, and there's a lot of emerging technology that's being brought to bear in a lot of different ways. Before we kind of dive into any specific technologies, I'll maybe comment on some of the more macro trends that we're seeing with organizations now. And it's interesting, and we've had this conversation internally for the past couple of weeks, is that there's this concept of the acceleration of acceleration is kind of happening in the marketplace today. And what that means is that the pace of change is accelerating at an exponential pace right now. So it's not just like you're going to implement one piece of technology and you'll get an improvement associated with that. But when you start to combine things, think of it like a technical mashup kind of concept, right? When I combine multiple emerging technologies in a way that's new and unique to my industry, I get this tenfold, hundredfold improvement in terms of what I can do as an organization. So for example, if you look at AI by itself is an incredibly important technology that I'm sure we'll talk about in just a little bit here as well, in a little more detail, but that's been incredibly transformative. But when I start to marry AI with robotics, right? Now, what does that do for an organization? Let's say a manufacturing organization. Or we're starting to see robotics being used in field service work, right? And I start to embed more intelligence and AI with that as well, right? What does that now bring to the table? So I think as organizations are looking at these technologies that we're going to be going through, if I can marry those up and couple those up and look at that from a more exponential perspective, I think it's an important, at least philosophy for organizations to really kind of take a look at. We just came off, we do arts of the possible type workshops with clients. And one of the things we try to push is that it's not just, using all this great stuff that's available. It's like your clay, right? You can mold it and do whatever you want with it, right? And it's not about the next 6 to 12 months, but and not just a single leapfrog, but if you look 1 or 2 or 3 steps ahead, what can you do with this stuff? And that's really kind of a mindset change for organizations to kind of wrap their head around. But for me, I think AI is hands down one of the biggest and is going to continue to have one of the biggest impacts for organizations, short and long term as well. Jeff, what are your thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think your call out around machine learning and artificial intelligence is, clearly an important one, especially as organizations embrace more, hybrid work concepts or flexible work concepts. Finding the right subject matter expert at the right time, the right content across libraries and libraries of content, and doing more with less, right? Trying to be more efficient, more understanding of the customer experience. Machine learning tools, artificial intelligence tools can help close that gap even across geographies. I think that's a great point. I'll talk a little bit more about that one later on too. But I think that's a great call out. And your comment about acceleration of acceleration, I love. It feels like, and I think I heard you say the other day, in the next, and keep me honest on if I get this right or wrong. In the next, what is it? Well, actually, you know which one I'm about to say. How many years? That one.
Yeah. So yeah, in the next, candidly, in the next 100 years, you'll have the same level of innovation that we've seen over the past 2000. So
Wow.
it's happening in a very short time span, relatively speaking, right? So it's crazy.
Wow, that's huge. And Jeff, while we have you, we've talked about innovation, which, this trickles down into the industries that we work in and can become a bigger part of a cultural shift or a trend in the industry. So talk to us about how these innovations, some of the ones that Phil had talked about can become huge trends that organizations and businesses are now catching on to.
Yeah, absolutely, Melissa. Yeah, there are so many exciting technologies that we saw coming to bear in 2021 that will continue into 2022. I don't know if you can go forward one slide. At least on mine, it's still on Phil's. But thank you. I tried to curate a couple of them. We could probably have a webinar. I was saying this earlier to Joel and Phil. We could probably have a webinar that's an hour on each of these topics individually, but I will try to just give a point or two on each one. So obviously, hybrid cloud, right? I think as we've gone through the last year or two, and organizations have been embracing cloud and trying to understand where are the right workloads to run in the right places. I mean, I don't just mean like, oh, this is good for Amazon and this is good for Microsoft, but more behind that, right? What should I run at the edge? What should I run in my office? What should I run in a local tier 2 data center? What should I run off a content delivery network? What should I run in a cloud provider, right? So when we say hybrid cloud, it's not just, pick the workload and put it in Amazon or Microsoft. It's understanding the use case for a given workload, a use case for a given data set. And I'll give you a quick example. Phil mentioned machine learning, artificial intelligence. If you're doing a lot of video capture and you want to get intelligence out of that video capture, do you ship all of that data to the cloud for analytics? There's a lot of bandwidth associated with that. It might not be the right use case for certain types of image data. Or do you have some analytics that happen at the point of the video being taken, something that happens at the edge, some machine learning model that happens in real time at the edge, and maybe just the insights are sent up to the cloud. So, hybrid cloud, right? A very big concept we could talk about for a long time. I think a natural progression of that is the second one, data as a source of truth. I think it's really easy for organizations to say, well, I've done it this way forever, so I'm just going to continue doing it that way. Or I'm going to gather some data, and then I, perhaps will use some of it and throw away some of it, right? But really getting to this standardized, atomic, right? Loosely relational, referential, analysis-oriented sort of data model where data becomes a source of truth and decision-making for an organization. I think that's a real trend that's going to continue. And then the third one, so we have enough everything, we have enough as a service, right? Data as a service, desktop as a service, software as a service, right? Everything is as a service. So we'll just say that, everything as a service, XaaS. And I see a continuation of that trend where organizations might not know the benefit of something as a service. So, being able to try something as a service before necessarily deeply investing in it, I think you'll see a continuation of that trend. But, everything as a service speaks to this ongoing OpEx nature, linear scaling model, consumption-based, secured, identity relational, zero trust delivered service model. So, the more we think about those sorts of things, especially zero trust, where there's a permissions model that associates something, you'll start seeing more things delivered as a service. And as a service doesn't have to mean third party as a service. It might mean your organization delivering something as a service to your organization, right? Sort of changes the delivery model. But if you treat internal delivery as a service to the constituents within the organization, changes the way you think about things a little bit. How resilient does it need to be? How secure does it need to be? How do I productize this internally? So just a different way of thinking about things, but everything as a service, I think, will continue as well. I will not touch on this one too much because this is one Joel probably will touch on. It's an area of expertise for him. He's done a few podcasts on it. But flexible workspaces, hoteling, whatever you want to call that nature of flexible work. But workspaces are changing, right? We're seeing huddle rooms, we're seeing conference suites, we're seeing engagement models that change based on productivity and collaboration. We're seeing immersive spaces coming to the forefront, and we'll talk more about that probably later, but flexible interaction, and that's driven by flexible workspaces and other concepts related to that. I would be remiss if I didn't mention cybersecurity and cybercrime. As much as we might not want to think about it, it's just the reality of the world we live in. Threat actors are becoming more and more aggressive. They can do more quickly. Pace of change, as Phil mentioned earlier, is also happening on the threat actor side of the space. You're going to see a continued increase of ransomware, data breaches, leveraging that data. I think you're going to start seeing happening in new and unique ways. Potentially a breached organization's competitor being approached with some of the breached data. That's probably a new trend as opposed to it just being on the dark web for anyone to consume or being held for ransom in many cases. I think you're going to start seeing more targeted attacks because if you have that leverage, you can gain more financial benefit from it. Ultimately, most of the threat actors are in it for financial means. Zero trust, by the way, I think is a way many organizations can get ahead of this. To use a specific example, let's say hypothetically your organization was breached and all of your data was grabbed and posted on an FTP site somewhere. If you were using a permissions model, an identity model to secure that data, universal labeling, for example, Microsoft Information Protection, Azure Information Protection, that data, even if somebody had it on a USB key disconnected from the internet, on an FTP server in Norway, whatever it might be, that data with the appropriate protections attached to it would not be openable, even in that offline USB scenario I mentioned, because that data will require that authentication happen at the time of access, and that authentication has to happen against a cloud identity provider. So there's a lot there. I won't spend any more time on it, but zero trust models are important across the spectrum. Data, identity, devices, applications, cloud, on-prem, off-prem. It's so much to talk about there. The metaverse, augmented reality. Phil, this is one you could probably talk about forever, I'm sure. Look, augmented reality is a great tool for sort of the wargaming or what if scenario planning that a lot of businesses go through this time of year, but really all the time. How do you bring data to a situation? How do you enforce quality assurance? How do you train staff better? How do you make them more active in the field if you're a field service type organization? There's a lot to talk about there, and it also touches on elements of flexible workspace too, because the new workspace, we're looking at two-dimensional versions of each other right now. The new workspace might have a three-dimensional construct that some meetings are better suited for. So more to come there, I'm sure, in 2022 and beyond. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, we talked about this one already, but look, humans make mistakes. Let's let machines try first and have humans verify. If you do that, you can then reinforce those training models based on the human approval of what the machine might have gleaned as far as intelligence from it. That feeds reinforcement learning, but the whole concept of better, cheaper, faster, right? And people say, pick two, right? Can't pick three. Well, in the future, you might be able to pick three as long as there's a human element of that reinforcement learning and sort of verification. We'll see. And then connectivity. Pretty much everything we just talked about is only possible with what we would say is ubiquitous connectivity, right? It's a tough reality given some of the realities of the day and the disparate access to the digital divide, so to speak. But a lot of what we talked about requires ubiquitous connectivity. Is that LTE, 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi, CBRS, wired, fiber, Starlink, something else? I don't know. It's going to depend on your geography and your use case. But having the ability for a user to access the data and the user for the ability to collaborate and be productive in real time, it requires ubiquitous connectivity. And we saw during the pandemic users being sent home not such a problem in Silicon Valley, but a real problem when you're in 50 miles outside Denver, and there's not a lot of connectivity there, right? Just to pick one example. So anyway, I tried to go through that really quick to be time sensitive. I probably didn't do a great job of it, but Phil, I know some of these are near and dear to your heart. Any you want to call out and expound on? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm thinking about automated technology that allows you to unmute as soon as you start speaking. But no, I think Metaverse is interesting. Facebook aside and what they're trying to do with their meta concept and getting into that space, I think there's this whole concept and an idea behind digital twins that we've heard before. And really what that, for those who don't really know what that means, it's a digital representation of something that's physical, right? It could be something as simple as a product. It could be something as complex as a city. So the ability for us to identify and pull information, whether that's through sensors or other forms of data, and pulling it together, aggregating that and putting that and building a digital model of that so you can do predictive analytics and scenario planning and all those kind of things. I love that one. And I think that one is, in terms of our ability to address some of the larger global challenges, whether it's climate change, biological challenges that we've seen over the past couple of years, right? Inequities that from an economic standpoint, that scenario, let's play things out, let's try some things in a digital world, is going to have a huge impact on those things. Bob, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that part of things, whether the metaverse or digital twins concept.
Yeah, I know this is something that you've seen in the movies forever, sci-fi movies, but this is something that I really think we're going to be seeing more and more in the business world as a way for people to communicate with one another, to get together. And it's not just about, here's my cartoony avatar. This is a new way for people to get together. I mean, people getting burnout was a real thing before the pandemic, but COVID has made that just a compounded issue for us to be getting together safely virtually in a workspace that is, albeit a little cartoony today, means that we can actually get work done and have that, bring back some of that human communication that we've been lacking in this hybrid world. So yeah, it's really amazing things that are we have today and coming on the horizon.
Yeah, I love that. And Bob, while I have you, there's, this question kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of our chat about innovation and industry trends in 2021, because so many of these new innovations and trends are fueled by new tools and new technologies that come out. So do you want to talk about some of the specific technologies that came out in 2001 that were like extremely popular and, companies and organizations found a lot of use out of?
Yeah, I'd love to. And to Jeff's point about connectivity, the way we connected in the past using company laptops with VPN access and things like that, that's not as feasible today and not as desired today because everybody wants to bring their own device, et cetera. But it's not really meeting the security needs either. So with zero trust being super important and the way we connect and keep things separated but accessible, that is really, really important going forward. Like Azure Virtual Desktop is a good example of that. Not a new technology. Microsoft rebranded it from Windows Virtual Desktop as Azure Virtual Desktop. It's a modern replacement for the traditional remote desktop terminal server, but it's a multi-session Windows 10 or Windows 11 enterprise environment, which means that you have better compatibility over the old remote desktop server running a version of Windows Server OS. Better application compatibility, better printer compatibility, things like that. And it, like the remote desktop server that we used to have, AVD does give you the option to make desktop applications available. You can publish those out to the users or provide the entire desktop itself. Windows 365 Cloud PC, that's new this year. Like Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365 Cloud PC runs Windows 10 or Windows 11 operating system, but instead of being a multi-session host, each cloud PC is assigned to a specific user. This means the applications, the settings, etc., are specific to each user, which the cloud PC is assigned. In essence, this is a virtual PC for each user in the cloud. Applications are installed just like you would on any other Windows computer, but if you're running Azure Virtual Desktop in your environment, you can deploy those published applications to your cloud PC as well. So it's not necessarily, do I run one or the other? There could be a real good use case for running both in your organization, depending on your needs. So Azure Arc is another one. And by the way, all of these, just like Jeff said, we could spend an hour or more talking about all of these topics because they are just so big. They're such big technologies. Azure Arc is one that we haven't really seen. You don't hear a lot of people talking about necessarily in the business world, although there really should be, because it gives you the ability to manage your services across clouds and even on-prem. You build custom configuration profiles for both Windows and Linux VMs. You can integrate with VMware vSphere, allow that self-service VM control from Azure-based vSphere templates. You can allow developers to create, configure, operate, and delete VMs. Arc-enabled machine learning allows customers to build, train, deploy machine learning models on-prem using edge computing, in the cloud using Azure Machine Learning. Azure Stack HCI capabilities recently were added to this and allow you to use the auto-manage service for both Linux and Windows servers. So that's really exciting stuff you can do there. And if you're not familiar with auto-manage, you can do things like patch your servers without the need to reboot, do some amazing things there. Microsoft Viva, one that I think everybody's probably heard by now. Viva Insights has been around for quite a while. It's really helped people with productivity, with putting time in your calendar for planned breaks, time for training, focus time, that kind of thing. Been really, really useful. Making sure you get that meditation time in, help with the mental healthness of working in this hybrid world. But there's a few new family members to the Viva family, and that's Viva Learning, one of the newest members that helps employees learn in a more natural way by integrating this process into the workflow using tools they're already using, like Microsoft Teams. Viva Connections is another new member of the family, and it's all about empowering employees. So Connections helps users stay connected with the latest and greatest communications in the organization, allows users to take a more active role in the data collaboration, allows users to interact with content more than ever before through commenting and reacting. And the customizable dashboard interface in Connections becomes a gateway to a more modern employee experience. So users can save a SharePoint article for later consumption, as an example, and provides a platform for the company to push announcement videos to users. So that announcement from the CEO that you may never see because either you're in a different site or you've been working from home for the last 2 years. That's all possible using made easier through Viva Connections. So exciting things there. Microsoft XDR, extended detection and response, if you're not familiar with the technology. Not just a single product, but rather multiple layers of protection in this family. Microsoft Defender for Office 365 protects data in the cloud, including protection against malicious email attachments. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and IoT protect computers against exploits, malicious software installations. Also disrupts communications back to command and control networks if that ever happens. Microsoft Identity Protection, it's conditional access to protect your data, even from non-corporate owned hardware. Microsoft Defender for Identity, it reduces the risk of lateral movement in attack reconnaissance if somebody is already in your network. In Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, and Microsoft Information Protection extends that protection and conditional access to other clouds, to other areas. The protection of your data persists even when you've lost control of the data. And then, of course, Microsoft Sentinel is Microsoft Cloud SIEM. It collects the data logs from all of the XDR family, as well as many other infrastructure devices, to provide a complete picture. In the event of attack, you have all that data collected, you have all that evidence, and you can kind of replay the attack to see what happened. But with all those layers together, it really gives you a more comprehensive way to protect your environment. And of course, Mesh for Microsoft Teams, more than just avatars. I won't speak too much about this since Joel will have more information than I, but it was unveiled this past March as part of Microsoft's concept of a Metaverse. But it's more than just avatars, because it really gives users a way to interact with one another. So, and I guess my question is to Joel, and what thoughts you have about Mesh for Teams, and how you see people really leveraging that going forward.
So I think the really interesting thing about, we'll just take it at the highest level, Mesh for Teams, is really the fact that virtual reality and sort of, allowing your avatar to be more business centric is a whole new concept. And the cool part about it is you've got Microsoft adopting it, you've got Meta adopting it, you've got all these folks adopting it. And in the past, it was like, okay, we've had VR, we've had Second Life, you could have your own store inside of Second Life. This is nothing new. It's like what's old is new again. We always say that, but now it's usually when the big tech companies embrace it that we find a business purpose around it, that it then really has the sticking power that it's needed all along. So it's exciting to see, because it's not just going to be your avatar walking around and like waving to people like you can see in the early versions of Facebook's Horizon World that they rolled out. You'll actually be able to, in real time, sit there and interact on a whiteboard, or all these other types of technologies. And it's going to be a really, really exciting 2022. I've got a lot more to say on that one, but it's going to go from gimmick to reality very, very quickly, as you see the big boys really start investing in it. And I think, Microsoft's vision of what Microsoft Teams is evolving into is really your center point for everything. And as you guys spoke about, there are so many different offerings through the Microsoft ecosystem. But if Teams becomes your center point, and now it doesn't matter, I don't have to log in front of my computer to start interacting. I could be, lying in bed and putting on VR goggles and whatever the case may be, and now I'm working. So it's going to be an exciting time.
Yeah, and Joel, this is a great transition into what I wanted to chat with you about was, what are your thoughts or predictions on 2022? What technology do you think is coming?
Sure. I mean, this is I'm a super geek, so I'm really excited about this stuff. I love emerging tech, especially when it starts merging into the real world and not just the fantasy world that I like to play in. But building on what I was just saying, what I see happening is really working from anywhere, and as I put it here, wearing anything, right? So it's sort of the adoption of your avatar becoming something that's socially and commercially and acceptable inside of the enterprise. So it won't be, oh, do I see a thumbnail of Joel? If Joel doesn't want to put his camera on, it'll be like, oh, cool, nice hat on your avatar, and you'll start, interacting that way. So I think, with the adoption of the metaverse and all the different companies playing inside of it, there's going to be some standardization in there, but there's going to be security, especially on the Microsoft side. So you'll be able to feel comfortable, doing business inside of that environment. But what I tell people that I find fascinating is, as a remote worker forever, it was interesting to see people who are suddenly forced to work remote. They were putting on a suit in the morning. Then they were putting on a sweater instead of the suit. Then they weren't shaving. Then they were putting on a sweatshirt. Then they were putting on a T-shirt. So, what are they going to put on now? I think they'll just put on their avatar, and we won't care anymore. So it'll be interesting to see that, as things have evolved in 2021, how it became socially acceptable to have a cat walking across your screen or a child screaming in your ear on national and international broadcasts, that it's really going to be more about, can I do business successfully? And I don't care whether or not Joel's smiling at me as long as his avatar is, And I think, as we really think more about sort of the communication and collaboration pieces, tying back to what Jeff was saying about, sort of connectivity and every device being connected. Again, these are all things that companies were pushing for years ago. I mean, in the early 90s, the promise of LTE was that all of your devices would be constantly connected and you'd pay one monthly subscription fee to have constant connectivity to everything. So, are we now finally evolving to that because the world has sort of forced us and shifted us into that direction? I mean, hopefully. I think we'd all like to just be able to pick up a device and not have to think about whether or not, we paid the monthly subscription for that particular device. The interesting thing for me is here I am thinking I'm hip and cool and understanding what the future is going to be. So I was running some of this by my 13-year-old who mints NFTs and races virtual horses that people want to actually pay real money to buy from him. And he said, no, you got to think way out there. Like, why wouldn't your AI be interacting with your customer's AI? So you don't even have to attend the meeting anymore. Your AIs are sort of figuring it all out, and then they're coming back and reporting back to you. I'm like, that's not 2022, buddy. But he was, it was pretty funny to hear that. So just getting back to this, I have VR will be everywhere. I think I was, talking about that when you think in terms of the metaverse. But what's really interesting is, in my opinion, Oculus sort of missed a huge opportunity. They went virtual because everybody had to for Facebook Connect. People had already paid money, registration fees, and they were prepared to fly out. They could have very easily given people an opportunity or just banked on it and sent out Oculus Quest to everyone. Now, granted, they have the newer Oculus Quest is out now and it's cheaper and it's better, but that was sort of, could have been one of those forcing functions. But I do think that we're going to see it really happening in 2022 because people's knowledge and understanding of the metaverse and acceptance of the metaverse and the excitement around VR as it starts improving, I think is really going to, make VR a more common piece in our world. On the mixed reality headsets, I mean, you can go everywhere from, if you think about it, the big news will be Apple, and everybody's getting excited about what Apple's going to do in this space. But, Google was there. Magic Leap raised over $5 billion, $3.5 billion, sorry, trying to get into this space and continues to morph. But when you think about what mixed reality can mean, you also had Google Glass, who originally was going after the consumer. Now they're enterprise. HoloLens was always going after enterprise. But it's really more, again, back to really why Metaverse is going to be an exciting thing. When the big boys decide that this is a future to bet on, then you start seeing some really interesting things. And Apple traditionally has gone after the consumer and made the consumer aware and get excited about everything. So as they dip their toes there, it'll be interesting to see what happens next. I mentioned NFT. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I think what you're going to see and what I meant here with everyone will speak crypto, blockchain, and NFT. If you think about it, I don't know if you guys can hear me okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I'm hearing some background noise. Oh, it went away. Maybe we're good now.
All right, we'll see what happens. What I mean by everyone will speak crypto and blockchain and NFT, right now, if you're going to put your ATM card into an ATM and withdraw money, you don't have to understand. Hold on one moment. Let me.
No worries. I think he's going to change his headset.
While he's doing that, I'll just, comment really quickly that, Phil and I have been talking a lot about this as well. And, the sort of immutability of the blockchain, I think, lends itself to a lot of really interesting use cases, whether it's sort of data integrity or transactional consistency, as Joe was probably about to say, and, sort of the concept of the virtual world having objects with intrinsic value to them, and that speaks to NFT. So anyway, Joel, I'll throw it back to you there.
All right, we're going to do another sound test.
Oh, we can still hear it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's all right. Just keep going.
Yeah,
I'll throw it over the wall. Can you hear? It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
the timing. Where's my cat or my dog to walk across my screen? So what I meant was,
You were just
when
talking about all this, Joel.
exactly, it's fantastic, and it's socially acceptable. So instead, it would just be, maybe my avatar would be shaving right now. You think it's a shaving noise. Um, when you think about crypto and blockchain and NFT, some people understand it, most people don't. And I think it's where I think the world is going to go in 2022, and I've already seen some VCs putting millions of dollars behind it, is you don't have to understand the intricacies of what happens when you put your ATM card in, type in the amount that you want, and all of a sudden money spits out. You don't have to understand what's connecting to make all that happen, but you really do, for the most part, have to understand every little detail to actually do something with an NFT. And there's a lot of investment coming now, especially into 2022, to make that something that you basically just log into a website, create an account, hook up your bank account, fund some virtual thing somewhere, click, 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 browse, 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 click. Now you own, an NFT. You didn't really have to do anything. And it's always interesting when you start seeing things like that start evolving, because then it opens it up to the rest of the people to do something with. And then, to Jeff's point, and I'd love Jeff to go into a little bit more detail on that, as we start looking at what the blockchain can really mean to an everyday user versus, okay, I have some cryptocurrency, I need to put it, behind the scenes, there's some magic happening here, like what that's really going to mean for secure transactions and secure files and secure information.
Yeah, I'll just expound on that from the business context, because traditionally we think of crypto, blockchain, and NFTs as sort of consumer oriented, right? Or things that people are being speculative around. And, people don't like to use business and speculative in the same sentence too often. It connotates risk and, that sort of thing. So I like to think about the possibility of these sort of class of technologies, all backed, essentially by blockchain, but these immutable ledger technologies as things that do have real business applicability, because they speak to durability, immutability, consistency, trust. They don't have to speak to speculation and investment and that kind of thing, as we sometimes think about them, especially around NFTs. Like, there's this concept of, great, congratulations, you just spent 300,000 real dollars on a cat, and congratulations, that's your NFT. Like, most business users would kind of just look at that and be like, good, keep me far away from that, unless you're trying to be speculative, and that's a different market. Yeah, I think there's real use case in sort of the trust model of the world, the data model of the world, and what organizations trust about other organizations. Smart contracts, I don't know, Joel, if you want to talk about those a little bit, but smart contracts, are blockchain-based contracts that have this immutability to them, and it was signed, this is the party to the deal, there's a different parties with different legal constraints to them, and it's all codified on this ledger technology that is immutable. Very, very different than a meme that you're spending real money on to own. So I don't know, Joel, if you want to add anything.
No, I like that you brought it back to the real world, because I actually was having a conversation with someone this morning who's trying to understand NFTs a little bit more, and he's like, I just don't get it. And he's hearing stories of people that have a tremendous amount of money and own yachts in the real world, making sure that they buy their own unique yacht in the metaverse. So it's really pretty fascinating when you think about it. But again, if they're starting to understand it on the consumer side, then they'll appreciate the value that it's bringing on the enterprise side. And the biggest value that blockchain brings, to your point, is the making sure that something is truly unique and truly authentic. And it's sort of that final blessing of knowing that that's the real deal contract, which gets me thinking, I wonder what's happening in the real estate side of things with all the contracts that fly back and forth, and how DocuSign is sort of the the go-to on that one.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, Joel. I mean, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but Phil and I were talking to a customer in the New York real estate, sort of sphere, talking about just how complicated tenant and landlord and housing and contracts get in the New York market. I'm sure this is true of other markets too, but the New York market happened to be the one they were speaking about, and how there is this sort of multi-party deal-making arrangement that happens, and the immutability of smart contracts came into play, and we were talking about the applicability of the blockchain. So yeah, absolutely, it's a great point.
Are there any other comments or any other, items we want to discuss about this before we move on?
I was going to throw out one more that didn't make it to press time, but I always say this about voice enablement. Since it's something I'm passionate about and have been doing it forever. But the reason why I didn't put it here is because I always say it, and people still just use their Alexa to tell the time, play their music, and get measurements while they're cooking in the kitchen. So we're still waiting for sort of the Angry Birds of voice, but I'm hoping that with all the evolutions of these other pieces of technology, that we'll finally trust the voice interactions enough to make them truly what they were supposed to be when we first started doing voice interactions.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff, Phil, Bob, and Joel for all of your insight. If there are any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. We did have a couple questions from some people before, the meeting, this webinar. So I wanted to ask this, and then anyone who wants to answer it, you totally can. So the first question is, why are we talking about these future things when there are so many today issues that need solving?
Wow, that is a great question, whoever asked that one. So it is true. I mean, there are absolutely today challenges that we are needing to solve. And, I think those are important not to lose sight of. But we're also, as Phil sort of started out, in this acceleration time where if you aren't thinking a year or 3 or 5 ahead, your business might not be around in 3 or 5 years to have that problem to think about. So, and I don't mean for that to sound just as terrible as it probably sounded, like fear, uncertainty, doubt, world is falling. But it does, I think, sort of imply a certain, future requirement, which is we have to be thinking while solving the today problems about the tomorrow opportunities. And the opportunities of tomorrow happen to be things that are just being teased, as we talked about through this webinar, just being teased by things that are happening today. And you can just sort of start seeing these things coming down the pike. So yes, there are fundamental underlying considerations. We talked about the digital divide, a few of us, and there are a lot of those sort of constraints. Security is another big one, right? How do you do all of these things while maintaining a security perimeter or a security model that works for your organization with your regulatory requirements, your compliance needs? Those are things that are today problems, but there are solutions that are being talked about now and into the near-term future, right, in that sort of crawl, walk, run sort of world we live in, that we should be talking about now. And if we're losing sight of what the future opportunity is, we don't even have the chance to put the foundational elements in today. So, I think that, yes, of course, it's important to be thinking about today, but it's super important to be thinking about tomorrow as well. I don't know, Phil, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess I would question the question. I guess if you could say that. There are challenges and things we're trying to face and deal with today. I think the part of the reason, though, with having this kind of discussion is that, in a lot of cases, we talk to organizations and people who aren't aware what's available that can help solve today problems, right? Some of these technologies are a little, cutting edge and bleeding edge, but there are plenty of them that are available and can be deployed and used today to solve those challenges. So I think part of this is just, exposing people to kind of what those things are and what's possible, and hopefully it does help someone try to solve something that's been a challenge for them today.
Could I add a piece to that too? So, the pandemic hit and everybody was scurrying and everybody was trying to figure out how business was going to continue. And now we have an opportunity to take a step back and see what we've done and what the future holds for us and what technology improvements have come and what technology improvements are coming, so that we are prepared for, as I've been telling people, the next business interruption. So we're not talking about the next pandemic. We're talking about lessons learned in a world that we never, ever lived through before. And somehow we all moved online, business continued, we didn't go into an office anymore, but technology and security around that technology and communication and collaboration and all the things that we've talked about made all that possible. So if you are a business that got by here's your opportunity to take a step back, learn from the experts or learn from the advisors on how to make sure you don't just get by, to make sure that, God forbid, there's a business interruption of some kind, you could very easily shut off a floor, redirect your workers here if you want your workers to come back to the office, or make sure that they've got the appropriate connectivity and communication and collaboration and security in place to succeed in business and not really ever feel any type of a business interruption going forward.
So Heather asked the question, with the supply chain issues and more people going to the cloud and these kinds of technologies moving and innovating faster, do you think that the security issues are going to accelerate in pace and logic of opportunities that tend to attract bad actors?
I mean, in short, yes. So I think you've seen, especially over the last year or two with the evolution of, XDR as an industry term, right? It can be extended detection and response, or it can be cross-domain detection and response, depending on who you're talking to. But the point is that when you have to look across all these various domains, right, and it's not just the data I use or the cloud I use or the identity of the individual or the device that I use, right there. There's so many domains that this speaks across. The concept there is that the number of signals that can be ingested directly correlates to the detection of risk in real time, right? The more data you gather, the more quickly you can respond to a threat. I think that's just the general underlying premise. So, it's sort of like count everything, right? Report on everything, gather everything. And the more data you get, the more you can use machine learning to try and separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, or find a needle in a haystack, of some attack. And the sooner you can react to it. So, I think you're spot on that security issues will continue to increase in sort of velocity. But at the same time, the tools to detect them quickly will hopefully increase in velocity. And I know, the 24/7 SOC service that we offer, is built on top of Microsoft's XDR stack. And, we're able to see things that would never before have been correlated together coming to the forefront. Melissa, I saw Brennan's question right before Heather's too, and I love it because, his question is, are any of these emerging technologies overrated, right? And man, what a great question, because the answer is, yeah, probably all of them if deployed wrong, right? So, what I like to think about is anything can be deployed right, anything can be deployed wrong, and the definition of right and wrong varies depending on who you are and what you're trying to solve for, which sounds like a completely ridiculously loaded way of answering it, but different organizations have different requirements, constraints, values, cultures, right? Whatever it might be. And, as soon as the investment community gets hold of these and they start throwing dollars at one of these, there's going to be a lot of market capitalization trying to take advantage of these technology and just get them deployed, not necessarily get them deployed correctly. And I think that's where the context really matters. Any of these can be good, any of them can be bad, much like any technology in human history. And there's nothing different about these. It really takes a thoughtful approach, understanding what value you're hoping to get out of them. What are the outcomes? How do we define success? And a lot of what we do here at Infused is really trying to work with customers to define success. Where are you going as an organization? How do we choose the right tools for you to get there? But as Joe Gleason wrote in the chat, history repeats itself. This is nothing new to anybody who's lived through these boom and bust cycles before.
Yeah, Jeff, just to add to the security point that you made, I would just say this is that security best practices are security best practices, right? Either security is important to you or it's not. And the fact is that you need to, especially as you're exploring some of these newer technologies, you have to be looking at it through the lens of cybersecurity, right? It's one thing to say, hey, look, I'm going to capture data from wherever that data is residing. I have sensors out in the field, this and that. But what happens? It only takes one hole, right, in a security posture for someone to get in. So if I'm trying to capture data out in the farm somewhere and I don't lock down that endpoint, that hub where I'm collecting that data, my network's exposed, right? So that philosophy, as folks are thinking through where and when they might deploy some of these emerging technologies, security has got to be kind of like that foundational element to kind of everything you do in this space.
Yeah, we've all heard, SQL injection attack, right? Somebody goes to your website, finds a little, non-sanitized input that they can inject some data into your SQL server, drop a table, delete some data, whatever, cause havoc, let's say. Imagine a sensor out in the field where somebody realizes you're not sanitizing the data that's coming into your environment. You're just analyzing it, ingesting it, doing whatever. And instead of actually programmatically hacking your system, they're actually faking the data input in a way that compromises your system. It's a crazy concept, but those are the sort of things that people have to, it's all about data sanitization. I talked about atomic nature of data earlier on really briefly when I was talking about data as a source of truth. If you're atomizing your data and summarizing it into its most discrete elements, that drives good analytics, but it also helps you sanitize on the input because you can sort of separate out, data as it's streaming in many cases very, very fast into the discrete elements that you want to use for better analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like there are no other questions. So are there any other comments from the presenters, Joel, Phil, Bob, Jeff, before we go ahead and close out?
I was just going to add about Windows 365 because I think it's really something to watch because, again, it sort of ties in all the things we were talking about. All the elements of security and handling all of those issues are now, hidden behind a browser, right? And because of the connectivity improvements that we've seen, especially this year, because everyone was forced to work from home and just everything's become streamlined, it's again another one of those opportunities for people to really start innovating, and even Microsoft to start innovating. Because if all of a sudden now I'm not worried about all the infrastructure I have to support, I'm working with Infused as my advisor, and I just log on to my Windows 365 on whatever device I happen to want to log on to, and I've completely offloaded all my worries, then that's a step in the right direction. I'm on a Mac primarily, but if I want to start doing Windows things now, I just fire up the instance that was spun up for me, and I don't have to worry, is it patched? Is it safe? Is it this, that, and the other? So again, what's old is new again. This is technology in a new form, but in a much, much better form than it's been in the past. So when you start thinking about things like that and see how they're going to evolve in 2022, it's really exciting.
That's a great point, Joel, because there are two different problems that IT departments are facing right now. One is supply chain issues, where they just can't get the hardware that they want when they want it for new hires and replacements.
Yeah.
The other is a continual desire for bring your own device. Everybody wants to use their Mac, or they want to use a Chromebook, or whatever their preferred device is. Maybe an Android tablet with a keyboard and mouse. But Windows 365 Cloud PC allows those IT departments to now maintain control and have a truly zero trust environment by extending that accessibility out to these devices without compromising security, without having to worry about that. And they can streamline the process and get a new machine spun up in hours as opposed to weeks, or right now, more likely months. So a lot of benefits all around.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for presenting today, Joel, Phil, Bob, Jeff. I know I can speak for all of us when we are so appreciative to be able to have this space with you guys and just to be able to connect with you. So we hope to see you at the next webinar. I hope that you gained something from today. Our next webinar next month is going to be all about managed innovation, which I think is going to be such a great topic. So stay tuned for more information on that. And I hope that you all have a wonderful day. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.